Do you like that word trope? Do you think it's useful in like making work or like counter, reacting to it?
I think I use it as a thing to push up against.
Yeah.
I have no particular love of the figure of the cowboy.
Yeah.
It's not something that I have much reverence to, and I'm not trying to be um, respectful of it, but I know that it does, it carries a certain kind of meaning, and it's not like an inclusive figure, let's say, within that, its histories of representation, within the histories of that representation, certain, people have certainly been left out, and I'm interested in seeing what happens when, different individuals take up that character.
Like in Asian,
Certainly that.
complicating the trope.
Complicating it, or making it do something that it was never meant to do. Let's say a lot of those videos explores this idea of like the sensuous and even the sensual, and the sensuous is just taking pleasure from your senses, right, and being able to appreciate touch or textures or images, and these are spaces in which the cowboy figure is not necessarily allowed to go. So that's one of the things that I wanted to reimagine in having my Asian participants take up that character.
Yeah, I really like what you just said, like having something do what it's not supposed to do. And I feel like personally also I always I used to also buck against the trope, the idea of a trope, but making a trope do what it's not supposed to do kind of maybe complicates it, makes it a broader, wider vision of the visual of it. And I was, I used a lot of my own personal, even things I did, which was like a wrestler, and I used to lift weights and stuff, and be an athlete. And I was like, well, I want to put a weight bench in here. That's such like, I was like, damn, that's like
a very dude way of thinking. Like, they see any space, like, oh, that'd be great with a weight set there.
So that my 17, 18-year-old self had to, came out.
Yeah.
But then I was like, well, I wanted to be a truck too. I wanted to have this visual trick, or the carpet. You make a mess on a carpet, and then, or that has this evidence of it. You're supposed to wipe it, clean it up, but instead we put it into the carpet. So I like this idea of these objects not doing what they're supposed to be doing,
Right.
to kind of tell a difference or use that, but to go somewhere else. Like,
Just an easy way to jump into your show. Where does the title?
so I guess I'm always interested in events, and obviously like a specific event, and that being a location, taking place, and this very much being centered on a certain location where this event took place, which is on the I-20 highway, 20 miles east of Dallas. It's a highway, right? But a lot of times in forensics or cop shows or movies, or like the cheesy America's Most Wanted, there was this reenactment. And, part of and now they use forensic animation to reenact, the event. And it was just kind of a play of these two words, which is prosthetic is, sometimes attached to the body, or it's in place of the body, or there's this, sometimes it helps. Or it could be, something that really triggered it was like glasses on prosthetics.
Okay.
Eyeglasses.
Yeah.
And you don't think of it that way, but it helps you obviously to see, hopefully sharper, or see clearer. So this was kind of definitely taking imprints of this location, or where it took place, and it, kind of pulling that apart, and that became almost like a lens to see other aspects, like we talk about masculinity or violence and things like that. So it might not be like completely proper the prosthetic location, but
Yeah.
it became a physical location that helps us see this event or see aspects of the event, but actually maybe other things,
Yeah, and then just thinking about the way I don't necessarily have like a specific text that I use in my show, but I guess like there is a certain history of, or a more well-known history of like Asian immigrants to this country. I mean, and that's like the text that I draw from, or the history that I'm trying to reimagine in a certain way. I knew that even, I reference very specific historical facts and events in the video, but I in no way wanted it to be a documentary, kind of like what you were saying. In fact, I create this sort of semi-fictional voiceover in order to ask like a different question about history, specifically in the way in which we think about these men that were working on the railroad. So much of the way in which history has identified them as labor, sort of disposable labor. I was actually more interested in just sort of the emotional space that they might have occupied, or how they felt being surrounded by other men in these work camps or in these like tight claustrophobic tunnels.
So you're also trying to provide like a silhouette or 5 silhouettes with
I guess, or trying to take something, more simply take something familiar but provide a different way of understanding them. Taking this trope of the cowboy, this sort of caricature that we all, have an image of in our mind, but trying to invest like a different kind of energy or affect or performance, really, right? Because I think my video is very much performance based.
And one of the images that, one of the figures, people, is this dancer who's doing that beautiful dance, and we're jumping right like down the street,
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, like, how was that to give? Who is that? Is that to give like a really kind of? Whereas others, this is mashing, or we call it. We were saying overlap, but it's kind of a mash too, like modern and traditional. But then you go to this character who's like. Seems like that's what they do in there. That's
right. He's the one person that doesn't seem like he's in costume. That he shows up and he's doing himself in a way. Yeah, there's Andrew, and he was an actual dancer. He wasn't part of the main group that had speaking roles and got to dress up. But he came in as an attempt to, because he only shows up in the scenes playing with the tunnel, and the movements that he does was an attempt for me to think about how movement can function as a form of protest. So instead of showing you footage of what the railroad strikers look like in that tunnel, I wanted to use a sort of perhaps a contemporary analog to that. When I shot that scene, or the idea for that scene really came during last summer, during all the BLM protests actually, and watching that unfold, but also noticing that at a lot of these protests, people were dancing. People were using dance finding that as the appropriate response. And there were these really powerful scenes, news footage of people dancing right in front of police officers, right? So squaring off, not in a violent gesture, but in a kind of semi-choreographed, artistic gesture. And I thought that was a really powerful thing to see, and to visualize and to conceptualize. So Andrew's role was really based on that, being like how these sort of abstract movements can also suggest protest. Because these railroad workers that were striking, again, their movements were all about labor and about value extraction. Perhaps dance movement can somehow undermine that when your body is not, utilized just for the sake of capitalism, for the sake of industriousness. What is left over? What are these sort of excess movements that can be thought of? So
how does the body move differently with with its own kind of freedom, or that isn't like monetized, or this way of life that's so regimented.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how that came in. But I also like the fact that like he just kind of comes out of nowhere. He does sort of like put the other images into tension, and the way it's shot too, like in this very long open street, was also meant to like kind of visually parallel the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
This like shot vanishing point in the distance.
It's almost inverted. The white of the tunnel is, I remember his black wardrobe.
Mm-hmm.
Something like a fixed opening of the tunnel is cube. It's now this world, this whirling body.
Well, I think we come at it. Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking at different versions of the tough guy. I think.
Yeah.
Or like an American version of a tough guy. Like the weight bench is certainly a part of that. And then the cowboy occupies a lot of space within that world. And maybe the cowboy is like an easier target, I guess. Like it has like a very specific set of features that is somewhat consistent. That I try to that I play with, certainly in the representations that I create in my video. Even just having it be played by an Asian character, I think really like troubles it a little bit. That's not to say there aren't actually like Asian cowboys working in the world right now. I'm sure there are many, but seeing it in this particular context already, I don't know. There is an act of subversion, but I think also it's more about like stretching that representation open. I'm not. Do you think of your work in that way too? Like how do you play with those particular images?
It definitely started more as this this personal feeling, like meaning one of the most extreme moments I felt was because there's a biochemical and a chemical and an emotion, like a physical reaction you have of when you're getting bullied or when you're getting threatened into a fight, or that situation. It doesn't have to be a fight. And when I started a bunch of these performance series, I thought about what was the most sort of where did I feel the craziest, basically. And that was like right before when someone's trying to bully me or someone's trying to start something with me in high school, because I moved around a lot. And that I was like, well, I want to take this moment that felt so extreme to me, adrenaline and all this, and change it, basically. Just change. I didn't even know how. So that was like one of the first people. Actually, the oldest piece there is fronting, where we're just intimidating each other, right?
Yeah.
And so that visual,
Stepping.
stepping and intimidating, and that's in a bullying situation or a fight situation might only last a few seconds, But the image of that immediately people were reacting to would have this. Viewers would have this visceral response themselves, because this is danger, This is.
But it's also something that a lot of people have probably found themselves in, like stepping, not the actual fight, but just like, oh, you're gonna step, like this sort of like the initiation, but not the follow through. I've certainly been in a situation like that, but like not like gone all the way. And I think I like the way in which like the step, the front becomes the altercation. But like that's all you need to do to have the fight. You don't actually need to like punch someone, but like you can do this sort of like physical. I don't know. It's like just getting in someone's space is already a kind of violence.
For sure, yeah. The personal, and that's always been an interest, is break down a personal space, this space that we don't have right now, or
Right.
But that breakdown leads to maybe sex or intimacy, but that intimacy could also be violence, and that's really interesting to me. This trait and that like sort of chiasm, that trade of smells or interaction or bodily, on a physical level, but also creating this event. There's this exchange, and just breaking down in that person's space and getting into that moment, I think has its own definitely aggression, or violence, and then the other one where we're
But you subvert that though, right? At least in the parking lot video,
Yes.
where that violent energy, or we all expect there to be some sort of violent conclusion, is turned into like this incredibly tender, very physical but still tender kind of interaction between these two characters. You're one of them.
Yeah.
This other person.
I mean, we kind of have, maybe when I don't know about you, but maybe when you were younger, this intermingling of like some of these very basic American forms of masculinity, or we were talking about the weight bench, or that sort of performativity, or sports. Did you ever, interact with it, or interested, or?
I mean, I think, my peer group, I think we were all aware those things are there, like those sort of markers for, normative masculinity, or whatever you want to call it. But fortunately, we had permission, we had the ability to kind of skirt all that, just because we were, the school we went to did not necessarily value being an athlete, being, a jock, or those kinds of things that I guess sort of uphold a certain performance of maleness. There were more options, I guess, in terms of like how you wanted to be a young man. So we didn't necessarily feel like overly constrained by these, perhaps more oppressive expectations. But I think even but being, I think that was part of being children of immigrants, right? Like not knowing the correct way of doing things. I mean, certainly there were images in popular culture we were consuming that sort of became a kind of background script. But I think that because we were, not from because we had a different culture to draw from, we were allowed to mix things up a little bit.
It almost wasn't directly passed down to us.
Exactly, yeah. Or we could see that, like, that option is there, but we don't have to take that. It's not as naturalized as it is for other people. So I think that allowed for a certain freedom in deciding how we wanted to be ourselves, let's say.
That's an interesting point, because again, you said like not knowing how to do it right, I think is like such a great way to be in some ways. No one passed down the sports I was doing. I was using sports almost as therapy, like movement, to move my body. I had in high school anger issues and things, and it came out in different ways, but sports really helped me. But the sort of culture around it, it wasn't what I was signed up for, but it was prevalent. It was all talking about it, or locker room and all this, and it wasn't something passed down to me. It wasn't something I had any idea how it existed, but it existed right from the beginning, and so you kind of see it as an outsider. I never like dove into it, because I really was there to like move, and in wrestling and other things. But you kind of become a little fluent in it, or you kind of like learn picking. It's not hard to pick up, so.
Well, for some people, not for everyone.
But I don't have any loyalty to it. But I will. It is a part of me, It is there. It has an imprint, And I think that also connecting to like being children of immigrants in America. One foot was in this like Muslim household I was in, and the other foot was like in American high school.
Yeah, and it's not to say like my friends weren't on sports teams and played sports, but we definitely did that. But we didn't, we did it because it felt good. It was a way to sort of like commune with one another. There was definitely like it wasn't about being competitive or achieving anything. We were sort of overachieving in other ways, but like in terms of like the way we were physical with each other, and sort of trying to understand, like learn like how we were assimilated. I guess like it was much more sort of open ended. There was no pressure to conform necessarily.
It's probably sometimes the pressure not to conform.